Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. We begin by meeting Reed Richards and his friend Benjamin Green, whom we'll call Ben, visiting Victor Doom to explain that, according to his theory, an intense cosmic storm in the past accelerated the evolution of life on Earth, and he is certain that a similar storm will approach the planet's orbit in 6 weeks. That's why he plans to conduct a space study to learn more about the human genome, with which they could achieve wonders like curing diseases or extending human life. However, he is immediately interrupted by Doom, who reminds him that his last research left him bankrupt, and he's not sure if he should support them since, according to his research, he was already rejected by NASA. The director of Doom's genetic research, Susan Storm, joins the meeting, revealing that she is an old friend of both Reed and Ben. Later, despite the risks of this mission, Doom agrees to finance it in exchange for 75% of the profits. Reed's initial plan is for Ben to be the pilot, but he soon realizes that Johnny Storm, Dr. Susan's brother, will replace him as the pilot. Johnny disagrees with this decision, as he was Johnny's former commander at NASA, from where he was expelled for putting women in the flight simulator, causing it to crash. However, as he has no choice, he accepts the role of co-pilot. Afterward, the team assembles in their new spacesuits. They used the space shuttle to reach Doom's space station, where Doom himself was waiting for them. The mission begins, and while Ben is the first to go out to expose the samples to space radiation, Doom uses the observation room's view to try to win over Susan. Suddenly, Reed Richards receives an alert that the storm that was supposed to arrive in 7 hours is only minutes away. He immediately informs Doom, and he is fortunate as he interrupts him just as he was proposing to Susan. However, Doom refuses to abort the mission, and seeing that Ben hasn't returned yet and the others are waiting, he decides to close the shields, leaving them outside. Susan, however, chooses to go help her friends, exposing herself to danger. Ben arrives, but it's too late as radiation enters through the openings, bathing everyone except Doom. Afterward, sometime later, Ben wakes up next to Johnny. They are in quarantine, and despite all medical efforts, they couldn't do anything to save his appearance. But when he looks in the mirror, he realizes it was all a prank. Johnny leaves to avoid being beaten up and on his way encounters Reed Richards, who notices that he has new gray hairs. Finally, we see Susan still in bed but in good health. On the other hand, Doom receives an ultimatum from the bank as the mission was a complete failure, and his stocks have plummeted. The scene shifts to Johnny, and when a nurse, whom he was trying to flirt with, measures his temperature, she finds it exceeding 100 degrees Celsius. Still, he believes it's normal and, with his charming skills, manages to avoid the protocols and goes skiing as if nothing happened. At the same time, Ben meets Reed and tries to explain that he doesn't know what went wrong with his calculations, but Reed doesn't blame him, as he's still alive. Afterward, we see Johnny starting to ski. Everything seems normal until suddenly, he bursts into flames in his clothes, causing him to become distracted and fall into a precipice. However, before dying, his whole body is surrounded by fire, and he manages to fly to cushion his fall. Meanwhile, Ben realizes that Reed is a coward and won't talk to Susan on his own, so he tricks him into making them meet at the same time. In the meantime, Doom was waiting for Susan for dinner and starts feeling strange, where we see that some changes have occurred in him, from the scar on his face to his new ability to move metal objects. In the other meeting, Ben needs to leave when he feels that something is wrong in his stomach, but things would get more interesting here because time passes, and Susan leaves Doom standing, feeling much more comfortable with Reed Richards, until that idiot has to open his mouth and say he's happy with his relationship with Doom. This annoys Susan, as she knows that Reed Richards truly loves her but doesn't have the courage to tell her. This is exactly where her emotions make her become invisible, and when she accidentally knocks over a wine bottle, Reed catches it before it falls, discovering that he has the power to stretch himself. At that moment, Johnny arrives naked, explaining his situation and now being able to generate fire on his body and control it. Meanwhile, we see Doom starting to lose his hair, and Ben's condition is worsening. When their friends arrive at his room and find the door locked, Reed uses the elasticity of his hand to open it from the inside. However, upon entering, they discover that he has just left, destroying everything in his path. At this moment, Doom arrives and learns about the situation but chooses to hide his condition and orders them to go after him. They are lucky to find a photo of Ben's girlfriend's family, understanding that he went to see her. Meanwhile, Ben steals some clothes and then reveals himself to his girlfriend. However, upon seeing him with his new stone-like appearance, she gets scared and flees. The next day, Ben climbs to the top of a bridge to reflect, and there he encounters a suicidal man who fears him and tries to escape. The man slips and falls into the middle of the traffic, and a truck is approaching him. Fortunately, Ben decides to save him, stopping the vehicle with his body. His friends arrive at the scene, but as the crowd doesn't clear the way, they decide to send Susan, who needs to strip completely to become completely invisible. Although she doesn't fully control her powers and is almost seen by the world, she manages to hide in time. At the same time, Ben is surrounded by the police, as they consider him a threat due to his rocky appearance. Finally, when they reunite, a gas tank explodes on the bridge, but thanks to Johnny, who uses his body to shield a child, and Susan, who suddenly uses a force field to contain the explosion, no one is hurt. The firefighters are about to fall into the river, but they are saved by Reed's strength and elasticity. The entire crowd, along with the press and the police, recognizes them as heroes. Moments later, Ben's girlfriend arrives, but she is ungrateful and only came back to retrieve her engagement ring before leaving. Upon seeing this, Reed Richards vows to dedicate all his time to finding a way to restore his human appearance. Later, they discover that they are now considered superheroes known as the Fantastic Four. This news soon reaches Doom and his associates, who choose to withdraw their funding, as the existence of the Fantastic Four only showcases their failure to the world. Shortly after, when they arrive at their hotel, they realize that they are now celebrities, with police security included. After this, once Reed Richards shows his laboratory, they are accommodated in their rooms. Susan receives a visit from Doom, who proposes to take her to one of his houses and treat her with his doctors for a cure. However, Susan mentions that she prefers to stay there with her brother. At that moment, they are interrupted by Richards, who apologizes for the failed mission but makes it clear that the accident is the fault of both of them because he didn't want to abort the mission. Doom doesn't accept it and is about to attack him, but upon seeing Ben present, he decides to leave, fearing being crushed by the rock. But the story doesn't end there because as he descends in the elevator, Ben hits the wall and discovers that he has great strength and that his anatomy is also changing. In the laboratory, Richard starts conducting analyses and discovers that their organs are also solidifying and turning into stones, revealing that Susan's invisibility is a deviation of light that she can only master if she controls her emotions, especially her anger. Johnny discovers that he is able to control the temperature of the sun, but if he can't control it, he could destroy the Earth. Later, while trying to control their powers, Susan accidentally attacks Ben, who makes it clear that it was she who ended their relationship. However, she makes it clear that she did it because he didn't want to move forward and live together. But they are interrupted by Johnny, who complains about accidentally setting his clothes on fire all the time. At the same time, Doom also undergoes tests and discovers that his whole body is transforming due to an infection that is turning him into a stronger organic metal alloy than adamantium. However, this transformation will be completed in 2 weeks. The doctor explains that he must inform the health authorities about his infection, but he realizes that this would mean the end of his public figure and reputation, so Doom kills him. Back in the laboratory, after considering all their powers, Richards uses their spacesuits to create a new uniform that can adapt to their needs. He shows them that he plans to build a machine to reverse the radiation, but makes it clear that it will take time, as the slightest mistake could worsen the consequences and even kill them. Since they can't leave, as everyone recognizes them, they begin to live like a family. Johnny spends his time making jokes while Reed and Susan have their own issues. Meanwhile, Doom's infection has advanced to the point where he can now control electricity. With these new powers, he decides to visit his former bank partner, and with an energy blast, he kills him as revenge. When Johnny watches a biker event on television, he decides to put on his suit and escape, arriving at the location. Participating, he gets carried away by adrenaline, and his motorcycle escapes. About to fall from a great height, he activates his powers and manages to cushion his fall. As a reward, he receives cheers from the crowd. In an interview, he reveals to the world that his superhero name is the Human Torch, Susan is the Invisible Woman, Reed Richards is Mr. Fantastic, and Ben is the Thing. The team goes after him to make him return, but Ben's anger causes him to destroy Johnny's car and turn it into a steel ball. A fight breaks out between the two, but the attacks are interrupted by Susan. Later, we see Doom infiltrating an army weapons warehouse and stealing a heat-seeking missile launcher. Meanwhile, the Thing is still upset with his team and goes to a bar to drown his sorrows. There, he acts like a fool and meets Alice Masters, a fortune teller who, despite touching him to get to know him better, says she likes him because to her, looking different doesn't mean anything bad. At the same time, Doom comes to the conclusion that Reed Richards has taken everything he wanted, so he initiates a revenge plan. But before that, he needs to get rid of the Thing, whom he finds in a restaurant, as he could be a major obstacle in the lab. Susan finds Reed Richards asleep due to exhaustion. Together, they go to the observatory, where they had their first date. There, she reveals that, despite everything, she still loves him and is hoping that he will decide to move forward in their relationship. While he ponders, men often think a lot. Let's go back to Doom, who meets the Thing to sow the seeds of doubt about whether Reed Richards can really cure him or if he's just distracted with Susan and hasn't progressed with his project. Later, when Reed Richards and Susan return to the lab, they find the Thing, who, upon seeing them, confirms that Reed has not advanced in his cure. Richards tries to explain that the machine is not ready yet because there are too many variables he needs to adjust to avoid dying in the process, but the Thing doesn't believe him and starts a battle. Reed Richards defeats him with his flexibility, as he doesn't have many options. After releasing the Thing, Reed decides to accelerate the process and tests the machine on himself. Upon exiting, he seems to have succeeded, but his elasticity has not disappeared. In fact, it has increased. However, he mentions that he needs more power to refine the process and control the radiation. Doom overhears this and later calls the Thing, explaining that the machine is now working, and he has enough power. He convinces him to enter the machine, which seems to work well. At one point, it seems like it's about to shut down due to excessive radiation, but Doom fixes it using his powers to absorb all the radiation, which affects the entire city and alerts the other Fantastics. Once the doors open, we see that Ben has been restored, but he realizes that Doom used him only to absorb his powers and become stronger, taking him out of the game so he can't stop him. Richards goes to the scene and sees what happened. He offers to help Doom return to normal, but it doesn't interest him, and he attacks him with his energy beams. Since Reed still doesn't control his powers, he falls from the building. Upon seeing the reflection of his disfigured face, he decides to put on an iron mask. At the same time, Susan and Johnny find Ben, and he explains that Doom now has powers and that Reed Richards has been kidnapped by him. Later, at his house, Doom begins to torture Mr. Fantastic, freezing him to hurt him without his elasticity saving him. It doesn't end there, as he uses the weapon he stole from the army to launch a missile at the Fantastic Force Tower. Upon seeing it, Johnny launches himself from above and, for the first time, manages to control his powers to fly, attracting the missile through the city until he manages to divert it and make it collide with a boat. Next, Susan attempted to free Mr. Fantastic with her invisibility, but she was soon discovered by Doom. At that moment, Mr. Fantastic realized that the machine in their building had been activated again. We are with Doom, who still had feelings for Susan, so he gave her the opportunity not to fight, but she attacked him without thinking. Despite using her invisibility, she was no match for Doom, who easily subdued her with a single hand. Everything indicated that Doom had won, but suddenly Ben appeared again, as the Thing, and sent him flying with a punch. However, Doom was not easily defeated. He immediately returned and began a battle of strength against the Thing. This battle extended throughout the building until they fell into the city streets. There, the Thing threw cars at Doom, but he always got back up. The Thing tried to attack the enemy but was struck with an electrified iron bar. Fallen in the street, he was about to be harmed, but that's when Mr. Fantastic and Susan arrived to defend their friend with their powers. To complete the team, Johnny also returned. For Doom, it didn't matter if they all gathered, as he considered them insignificant. That's when he used his powers to gather energy from the city and attack them. Johnny and the Thing took the first hits, but when he tried it with Susan, she blocked him with her shield. Furthermore, with the help of Mr. Fantastic, they trapped him in a rubber cage. Once freed, he was defenseless for Johnny to envelop him in a fire tornado, with the heat of a supernova, while Susan prevented the fire from spreading in the surroundings. Next, we see that the heat consumed the little skin he had, revealing his true metal body. To finish the attack, they decided to douse his body, which was thousands of degrees Celsius hot, with cold water, causing him to solidify due to cooling. Afterward, they considered him safe and celebrated their victory. A grand celebration took place, and Johnny used his outgoing personality to attract women. The Thing was in a new relationship with Alicia, and Mr. Fantastic finally decided to express his feelings and proposed to Susan, who accepted without hesitation. In conclusion, we see Doom's body being transported on a cargo ship to the country of Latveria. In space, far away, we see a planet being destroyed, and a wave of energy passes close to it. This wave continues to advance through space until it surrounds the moon and enters Earth's atmosphere. Passing over Japan, it solidifies the water in a lake, then moves on to Giza, Egypt, causing snowfall, and finally Los Angeles, California, where it disrupts the power supply in the region. The next day, due to these disruptions, the Fantastic Four missed their flight, which was close to the day of Reed Richards and Susan Storm's wedding. Therefore, the team needs to accept a tourist flight, as they don't want any more delays. Later, at the Fantastic Four's tower, Johnny arrives with the idea of using sponsored new uniforms but is immediately rejected by his sister. When he and Richards are alone, Reed tries to explain what he has discovered about the recent anomalies. Upon hearing this, Johnny convinces him to put it aside and focus on his bachelor party, or he will tell Susan that he is still working. On the other hand, in Latveria, we see the same wave passing again through this small nation, awakening Victor Doom, who now lives there. Later, when Johnny takes Reed and Ben to a party full of women to celebrate the end of his bachelorhood, Ben decides to join the fun and soon heads to the bar to get some drinks. Meanwhile, in the office, General Heeger appears demanding to see Reed. Susan receives him and decides to take him to the party. Unfortunately for Reed, they arrive just when he was mingling with the women. After a sermon from his fiancée, Reed and the general step aside to talk. The general shows a photograph of the light, but Reed can't identify it. He then shows how 200-meter diameter craters have appeared on Earth. However, Reed refuses to build a sensor to locate the energy wave as his wedding is approaching. He suggests the general consult one of his colleagues. The general leaves in frustration. This doesn't end there, as before the military departs, Johnny attempts to flirt with the captain of the group, named Frank. Unfortunately, he is not successful. While all this was happening, Doom was preparing to take action, having them remove the welds from his mask so he could breathe freely. At the same time, Reed was also eager to take action, as when Johnny and Ben return to the lab, they find him working on the sensor for the general, but they agree not to tell Susan for the sake of team stability. Thus, the wedding day arrives, and the entire press is eager to get some information. The ceremony takes place on the rooftop, where military personnel and prominent figures are present. Even Stanley tries to get in but is rejected. In the bedroom, Susan mentions to Alice that her wedding isn't going as she imagined, with all the sensationalism, but stops worrying when Alice reminds her that the most important thing is that she and Reed love each other. Nearby, when Ben goes to look for Reed, he finds him adjusting the details of his machine while talking to the general. As soon as he finishes, Reed's mind finally focuses on the present, and upon remembering that he is about to get married, he almost faints and needs to be carried. But the military is not the only ones monitoring that light, as ever since the adverb, Dr. Doom uses his satellites to do the same. Moments later, Reed receives an alert from his sensor, but instead of paying attention, this time he decides to ignore it to focus on the present and receive Susan at the altar. However, he can't concentrate as he is alerted by his machine again, and then the whole city witnesses how the radiation from that light is passing over them. As a result, the helicopter covering the wedding loses control and is about to crash on the guests. Fortunately, Reed and Susan use their powers and risk their lives to save the attendees, and the Thing does the same to save Alicia. Shortly after, they see how that light passes over them. Johnny sets out to pursue it and starts a chase through the city. The Thing goes through a building, and upon exiting, we finally see that it was a silver humanoid. The pursuit continues through the streets and into a tunnel, where the humanoid causes Johnny to crash to gain distance. However, it doesn't work, and as soon as Johnny gets close again, he decides to attack, but to his surprise, the humanoid easily dominates him and takes him into space, extinguishing his flames completely. Upon falling, Johnny saves himself, as he regains consciousness in time not to crash into the ground of some African country. In space, the humanoid leans to speak with what appears to be its superior somewhere distant in the universe, mentioning that Earth is a new world awaiting it. Later, after Johnny tells the others what happened, he names the humanoid the Silver Surfer and explains that he discovered that by radiating cosmic energy, he can alter matter to pass through it. The general orders them to track and destroy him before he attacks again. Moments later, Susan makes it clear to Reed that she's not upset about him building the sensor but because they can never have a normal family life. When she meets Johnny on the street, she finds out that he can't control his flames, and upon touching him, they witness how their powers are swapped, with Johnny becoming the Human Torch. But as he doesn't know how to control it, he starts floating. When Richards finds out what happened, he comes down to check on the situation. Susan, upon touching Johnny again, returns everything to normal. However, since Susan is not wearing her suit, she ends up revealing herself to the world. After analyzing them, Richards mentions that Susan is fine, but Johnny's molecules have been altered, entering a state of constant fluctuation after the encounter with the Silver Surfer. Upon hearing this, Ben touches Johnny, causing him to return to being a normal human, but in turn, Johnny becomes the new thing. However, this doesn't last long, as they touch each other again and swap their powers. Later, when Reed sees that Susan is still sad, he proposes to stop being superheroes, move away, and start a normal family after resolving the situation with the Silver Surfer. This makes Susan happy, but she asks them not to tell the others, especially Johnny, because her brother enjoys being a superhero. However, we see that Johnny overheard everything. Meanwhile, Dr. Doom arrives in Greenland, where he encounters the Silver Surfer, who is creating another crater. Face to face, Doom proposes an alliance to conquer the world, but the Silver Surfer rejects him, warning that everything will disappear. Doom is offended and tries to attack him, which doesn't work, and then he is thrown away. However, he discovers that the power of the Silver Surfer has begun to heal him. While Johnny and Ben discuss what Reed and Susan are planning, Alicia reassures them by making them understand that their friends just want to be happy. They are then interrupted by Reed, who makes it clear that, according to his investigations, if the Silver Surfer has passed by other planets, which, after 8 days of his visit, were destroyed. But that's not all, as he has also discovered that the craters appear in a numerical sequence. Thus, by calculating the coordinates, they now know that the next stop for the Silver Surfer is London. Once they are close, Johnny starts expressing his annoyance, and he indignantly reveals that he knows about the team's separation, emphasizing his disappointment at not being informed. But there's no time for arguments, because then they see the crater starting to form in the middle of the river, destabilizing a giant Ferris wheel full of people. The Fantastic Four arrives, and Susan uses her energy rod to break the wheel. Reed stretches his body to prevent more pieces from falling, and Ben uses his muscles to stabilize the wheel. At that moment, the Silver Surfer flies away. Upon seeing him, Johnny tries to go after him but is hit by a cable that changes his direction, causing him to touch Reed's body, which triggers the exchange of their powers, destabilizing the wheel. But Reed is smart enough to take advantage of the situation, and with Ben's help, he manages to weld the pieces back together. After that, they witness how the entire river has been drained into the crater. The general calls a meeting to inform that next time, he will bring more reinforcements, but Reed disagrees, fearing that there will be more victims. At that moment, Dr. Doom appears with his human face. Ben attacks him immediately but lets go when the general explains that he is now under his orders. Having said that, Doom makes it clear that, although he hates them, everyone has to work together since the world is at risk. Reed asks the general not to trust Doom, or he will regret it in the future, but the general holds his position, saying that he only regrets having trusted him so far. Once calm, Victor Doom shows the recording of his encounter with the Silver Surfer, and it is thanks to this that they discover that the source of his power is the surfboard. Therefore, to stop him, they must take it away from him. Later, when Johnny and Ben go for a drink, Johnny asks Ben, knowing that the end of the world could be near, how he would like to spend his last moments. Ben says that while part of him would like to fight, he would prefer to spend it with his girlfriend. His words make Johnny admit that he would also like to have someone by his side. While they are distracted drinking, Reed continues to investigate but finds no answers and starts to get nervous. Susan needs to calm him down with a massage. This works more than wonderfully because when she mentions that he should slow down his pulse, he remembers tachyon pulses, and that's how he manages to envision a machine that uses a field to take the surfboard away from the Silver Surfer. When Richards was explaining his plan to the general, he mentioned that he would be late because Doom isn't there. Susan decides to look for him, and upon finding him, despite seeing that he is building something he doesn't want to show, she just orders him to get back to work and leaves. Nearby, when Johnny gets out of the shower, he is intercepted by the captain to warn him that he must be ready because they will leave soon. Johnny doesn't buy this story because she waited until he got out of the shower to talk to him, so he tries to invite her to dinner, but once again, he is rejected, as, according to her words, the captain only considers him a liability who nearly killed her colleagues in London. Later, they move to the Black Forest in Germany. Here, when Reed asks the general to give his team more perimeter to work, the general not only denies it but also proceeds to remind him that due to his failure in London, they must now obey him as they are in his territory. But Richards doesn't remain silent and makes it clear that they will only have the Fantastic Four's help if they treat his team and him with more respect. Upon hearing this, the general is left speechless and orders his men to give them whatever they want. The Fantastic Four starts working, installing the tachyon pulse machine around the crater. At one point, Ben is surprised by a bear who, upon seeing his appearance, tries to intimidate him by roaring. Ben just finds it amusing and, so the bear won't bother him, he roars back, scaring it away. With 1 minute left for the machine to be activated, the Silver Surfer appears. Susan tries to keep him at bay with her energy field, but we see that the Silver Surfer can easily pass through it. So, Susan asks him why he plans to destroy the Earth, to which the Silver Surfer responds that he has no choice and that he is not the destroyer himself. But before he can continue, Doom convinces the general to launch an attack with a missile, regardless of whether part of the Fantastic Four is there. However, this wouldn't work because the Silver Surfer absorbs the missile. With his board, the Silver Surfer then retaliates against the soldiers. Reed activates his machine, and with that, the Silver Surfer is separated from his board. Doom arrives and takes advantage of his weakened state for revenge. Soon, the general and his men arrive to take him to a base in Siberia, where he informs the Fantastic Four that the Silver Surfer is trapped, and they cannot see him as their job is done. Mr. German also arrives at the location, immediately recognized by Reed as his torturer. While Mr. German begins to interrogate, the Fantastic Four conclude that something doesn't add up, something wrong with the Silver Surfer and his words. As it seems very important, they decide that they must see him finish talking. Therefore, Johnny distracts the guard so that Susan, in an invisible state, can leave. Thanks to a break for the torturers, she infiltrates the torture room. Face to face with the Silver Surfer, he explains that the true destroyer is someone called Galactus, the devourer of worlds, who survives by consuming organic energy. He mentions that he serves Galactus because only that way his world, which he loves, will be safe. A guard approaches, forcing Susan to return to her invisible state. Speaking of Galactus, we see that he is already within the solar system, passing by Saturn. At the same time, Victor Doom makes the general take him to the surfboard to analyze it. Knowing that the surfboard is the source of power that attracts a more powerful being, he prefers to be its new bearer and attacks the soldiers. He then puts on his mask, frees the board using magnetic attraction, and then rides it, finally gaining its power. Now conscious, the general shoots at him, but only causes his disintegration with Doom's new powers. He then abruptly leaves the facility, while the quartet arrives at the scene and witnesses the destruction. As Doom is faster, Reed decides to activate his latest creation, a high-speed aircraft. Moments later, they free the Silver Surfer, and although the captain initially opposes it, upon learning of the general's death at the hands of Doom and the new state of the world, she decides to let them pass. Once airborne, as they start chasing Doom through the skies of China, the Silver Surfer tells Susan that his real name is Norrin Rad, but their conversation is interrupted when they are suddenly attacked by Doom. Johnny launches an attack, but before Doom uses the river water to extinguish his flame. Seeing this, Reed splits the aircraft to have a better chance to counterattack, but we see that Doom is so powerful that he not only uses rivers but also mountains and the Great Wall of China itself to try to corner them. At one point, the Fantastic Four manages to surround him, but Doom uses his powers to create a tornado with them inside, then throws them into the city. When Doom sees the Silver Surfer defenseless, he materializes a spear and throws it, but before it hits, Susan tries to protect them unsuccessfully as the spear passes through her energy field and injures her. Things get worse at that moment, and they witness how Galactus has arrived, in the form of a monstrous stellar cloud, and is about to devour Earth. With little time, Reed explains that they must destroy Doom's pulsimeter because it's what keeps him connected to the surfboard, and as it's too powerful for one person, they decide to take the risk, and Johnny proceeds to absorb everyone's powers. Thus, he appears much more powerful before Doom and begins the final battle. Johnny starts using fire and elasticity to attack. Doom counterattacks with buildings, but this time he is overpowered as Johnny surprises him with invisibility. He then combines the powers to immobilize him and finally destroy his pulsimeter, separating him from the board. Ben arrives with a crane and takes the final blow. After that, when Galactus is about to devour Earth, the Fantastic Four witnesses what seems to be Susan's last moments of life. However, upon seeing this, the Silver Surfer decides to recover his board and, now with his powers, uses some of them to heal Susan. He then departs, and with Johnny's help, flies through the debris storm caused by Galactus. On the surface, it seems to be too late, but we see the Silver Surfer who is facing Galactus. He rebels against his master, making it clear that he will no longer serve him. We see how he accumulates all his energy and uses it to destroy his master, sacrificing himself. Later, when Johnny returns with the others and receives congratulations, he understands that he no longer exchanges his powers and, seeing his sister recovered, his happiness increases. At that moment, Reed and Susan inform that, after everything that happened, it is best to keep the team for the sake of humanity. Sometime later, we find ourselves again at Reed and Susan's wedding, now in Japan, where we see that Johnny is dating the captain. Everything seems to be going well until Reed receives an alert that Venice is about to sink, so they hurry to the ceremony to say yes and then leave to work, not before throwing the bouquet of flowers, which is about to fall into the captain's hands, but Johnny grabs it and destroys it, as he is not ready for commitment, and so we finish.